Hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Trying to get this all set up. We'll see. Yep, it's connected.
We're live. All right.
Good deal. It's nice when technology works. So we're closing out our Enneagram Voices series tonight. And tonight is going to be focused around living in harmony. And can I just say that it's been a really great series. I've loved both hearing from our people in the different triads the last few weeks and just the way that they've expressed their unique view of the world and experience, and like how that lens of their type has just not only given them clarity on how they view and live, but also like how they are growing. And also then on Thursday nights for the hangouts, for those of you that have been able to join us for that, that's just also been really fun, just to kind of chit chat with other people about the Enneagram. And I don't know if it was the first or the second week that I commented that part of what I love about the Enneagram is what was happening that night, and that people were being so vulnerable about really tender areas in their heart and areas that they might feel super self-conscious about, or that it just feels like something that is a struggle for them, a daily struggle. And they were just open and honest about that. And I just love being part of that conversation with you all. So we'll have our last one on Thursday if you want to join us. If you're a Ennea nerd or veteran, you're welcome. If you're brand new and you missed several of the videos, you're welcome also.
Yeah, it's been great. Sorry if I seem distracted, just making sure we're shared in all the right places. So yeah, it's been a fun way to start the beginning of the summer. And I feel like we've had really good discussions even about how to engage what's happening in our nation right now, and how our Enneagram home types have played into some of that, and how we can deal with being in our homes more during the pandemic. So it's just been really interesting to see.
Obviously more different stressors, and you need a lot of intensity.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to start off just getting into a couple more layers of the Enneagram before we get into kind of how to bring harmony, as we all hope to have in our lives, some more transformational practices and ways to access other parts of the Enneagram diagram. So to start with, we're going to talk a little bit about instincts, and we've touched on this in some of the other teachings and in some of the various triads discussions, but I wanted to be very specific tonight. So there's 3 different kinds of instincts that each of us have in life, the Enneagram says, and those are self-preservation, sexual, and social instincts. And so in those 3, in each type, so say for like a type 1 like myself, I would have all 3 of those instincts somewhere in me, kind of like a layered cake, they say. And my top most dominant instinct is either going to be for self-preservation, which is basically about preserving myself. So that goes as far as like health and security and figuring out, like making sure I have enough resources, food, money, that type of thing. Or a sexual instinct, which a lot of times people are like, oh, maybe I'm sexual because I care a lot about one-to-one relationships. It's not necessarily sexual like that word, but just like a one-to-one intimacy. And actually all of these particular instincts have a one-to-one component, but the sexual instinct tends to be one that is looking for kind of an intensity in that relationship.
The energy of another person.
Right, and they really focus in on that. And then there's also the social type, which tends to be a little bit more community-minded. I'm going to read a little bit about that particular one. So those types, the social instincts, they're more adaptive, and they tend to be looking for shared social activities with their partner. They still want one-to-one relationships, but they're more about finding things to do together. Maybe they care a little bit more about like a personal connection. So, and then do you want to say anything about the self-preservation?
Yeah, so, and she mentioned that that sometimes people misplace the one-to-one on the sexual one, but just in the same way, if you have a self-preservation or if you have a social instinct, you might also care about a one-to-one friendship. Like someone who might have a strong self-preservation instinct, they might really enjoy close friendships because it gives them a sense of security. maybe those friendships are making them, I don't know, strength in numbers, that kind of like that there are lots of reasons to seek out friendships and seek out intimacy. So that the sexual is the attractive instinct. Some also label it that way.
The sexual tends to be the most energized of the types. So all that to say, when you're looking at your type, perhaps you resonated with one of the 9 home types, but as you heard someone speak from Imago, or you got on one of the Zoom chats, you're like, yeah, I seem like a 5, kind of like Emily, but there are these things that don't quite resonate. That could be based upon the stacking of your instinct. And so those are like instinctual variants. And so they make us, even in the same home type, look different from one another, obviously, because we are. And so I think it really brings a layer of understanding to better know who you are and how you're operating, even as a particular one in the world. I tend to be a little bit more energetic. I'm definitely not a self-preservation one. I have a hard time figuring out between the social and the sexual. I think I'm a social. I actually just got done taking an assessment, and it was hard. I think I knew too much about it before I took the assessment. But if you guys are interested, there's a $12 assessment you can take on the Enneagram Institute about finding your instinctual variant. It's pretty interesting. So
I tested initially with the WEPS test, which is WEPSS.com. So that's to find your home base, and just as a diagnostic to kind of find if you're interested in that. But when I originally took that 5 years ago, I tested very high in the 5 and the 6. And I believe some of those qualities that attracted me were some of the self-preservation qualities. And so if I had to guess, I would say I'm a self-preservation 9. Christina says she senses a lot of social layers or nuances to me. I don't know. I haven't taken that test, but it's really interesting, and it's an intriguing way to just become more self-aware and to look at what makes us unique, so that, like, if just like she was saying, there might be the sexual 9, the self-pres 9, or the social 9. Those are all different 9s who all have different life experiences, who might be more introverted or extroverted. There's all these different layers, and so that's where it really can broaden both our understanding of ourselves, but also kind of bring some of that diversity and uniqueness.
Yeah. So should we dive into the levels of health?
Yes. So
okay.
In seeking harmony and growing, part of where Christina and I really felt an invitation in the Enneagram is it's not just a label, or it's not just a box to put ourselves in, but it's a path. And so a path that hopefully we're seeking more health, more balance. And so the Enneagram Institute, the resource that we mentioned, they kind of broadly define 9 levels of health for each type. And so there's another layer of complexity here. That's why we saved this for the 5th week. And so it just keeps getting better and more interesting. But basically, if you are at the level 1 in your type in your health, then you are your true self. You have options, you are self-aware, and you are present. You're able to be present and be objective about the situation that's going on. As you go down in levels of less health, then you're less aware, less present. You are more stuck in your type.
More compulsive behaviors that just come out of being kind of unconscious, or not really aware of your drives and what's causing you to behave the way you are.
And so if you're all the way at level 9, 1, you're probably not listening to this, and 2, you're probably diagnosable. That's where some of the pathological disorders lie, and there seems to be some correlation there. So most of us are in the middle zone,
average
between 3 to 6, and that's something that to pay attention to as you seek health. And it's a really interesting facet, I think, of the Enneagram, especially as you are laying yourself before God, and you're trying to grow, and you're trying to be more healthy, to kind of just pray over those levels and kind of get some feedback from other people, like, the people that you trust and know you the deepest, like you could even ask them like, hey, here's this, where do you think I fall in here? And you could kind of read those descriptions if you're curious there.
And obviously, those are going to change often. So most people don't believe your Enneagram type changes over time. So you're going to kind of stay in that
Your home base,
your
yeah.
home base type, and you're going to expand, but you're going to become hopefully healthier. So your level will change based on season. And many of us may have find ourselves in a lower level of health during this season. Or for some of us who love being home, maybe we're in a better level of health. You know, we've had more time for ourselves or to work on our hobbies or whatever else. I wish I had more hobbies.
Maybe to give some more specifics on what that might look like. For a 9, an average 9 we're drawn to be the peaceful person. And so an average 9 might just be like, I'm fine. I'm just settled. You know, I'm content. And that can be true, but it also can have a layer of avoiding conflict or of numbing out or being withdrawn, of just kind of being stuck in a little bit of a guarded type of a scenario. And so then the invitation on going toward health is to say, there is conflict in the world, and I'm going to lean into that. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to push through it. And that's really where you find true peace. It's not the absence of conflict, or you just ignore it, or you say, I'm fine. But you actually acknowledge that it's there, and you still show up and you deal with it, and the parts that you can control, you do, and you seek peace within it. Would you think that's a good way to explain that?
Yeah. Okay, so most of our evening we're actually going to spend talking about the concept of harmony triads. And this could be confusing because we've been using the word triad the entire time in a different way. So we've been talking about our centers of intelligence as triads. So like our gut triad was our 8, 9, and 1 that we had, where we talked to Misty and Sarah and myself. And then we had our heart triad with Brian and Justin and Vicky. And then we had our head triad with Emily and Libby and Kyle. And so those are like where you sit on the Enneagram. And then the idea of a harmony triad is that instead of paying attention to, for those of you who maybe have gone through the assessment before, instead of paying attention to where these arrows point and where you might go in stress or you might go in security, kind of diagnosing yourself for what your patterns are, the harmony triad pushes you to create a triangle on the Enneagram and to tap into the various centers of intelligence, your gut, your head, and your heart, and also to kind of bring balance to some of your posture in the world, those things we've talked about just a little bit. You're going to find your relational style is going to be more balanced. Your posture in the world, your conflict style, and so these triads. Dustin's going to show a little visual.
So the Enneagram emblem normally is a mix of weird arrows, but in this you can see how the 8, the 5, and the 2 are connected. And so part of the invitation for this is Claire and Scott Loweridge's, and Adele and Doug Calhoun. They teamed up for this book, Spiritual Rhythms for the Enneagram.
It is fabulous.
It really is. It is a 201 book for sure. It's not an intro book, but it's so chock full of good information. So that was the 8 and the 2 and the 5. So that is the first harmony triad. So if you find yourself as an 8 or a 2 or a 5, then you'll be listening for those numbers that you've talked about. It might even be helpful to go back and listen to, I'm an 8, but I didn't know I should be zoning into what our number 2 Brian was talking about as a 2. Well, that's somebody you could learn from and grow from and pull on some of their strengths to help bring you balance. Yeah.
And then,
so if you were, if you resonate as a 5, or do you want to go on to the next one? So if you resonate as a 5, then you look at the 2, the characteristics of the 2, and you realize that they have certain gifts and nuances and resources that are not native to you, but that we would say you're pulling from the heart of the 2 flavor. I didn't say that. The 2 flavor of the heart. That's your spot on the heart that you can draw from to bring more harmony and to bring more balance. So the picture.
Also, feel free to comment. I am paying attention to the comments. So for those of you that are watching live, we'd love to answer as we go if something isn't clear as to what we're talking about.
So the next triad is the 6, 9, and 3, which normally that triangle is usually connected, even in most of the other diagrams. So that is the 3, 6, 9 triad. And so that is the one I sit in. And so the invitation for me is to draw on both the loyalty of the 6 and the productivity of the 3. And that really broadens and diversifies my resources. And so this is a tool for, this is where the tool for transformation can be super helpful and challenging.
So if you have a good picture of the Enneagram in your mind, you've already figured out that the other triad we have left is the 1, 4, 7. So if you watched our other videos, I would be a 1, 4, 7, and in my like move the book in my last in my healthiest, I would pull from the 4, the individualism of the 4, where they bring this unique gift to the world and beauty and noticing meaning in different parts of life, and then also the joy of the 7 and the freedom in a 7. And so I totally resonate with that I am a better person when I can access those numbers and integrate them into my life. So you may have heard, we'll get more into how to use those triads, but you may have heard about tri-types with the Enneagram. Now it's kind of similar in that a tri-type is pulling from 3 different gut,
centers of intelligence,
gut, head, and heart. But it is more of where you just find yourself. If on any day you are sitting inside of who you are and you look and you see where am I sitting rather than where you're heading. So a tri-type for me, I don't exactly know for sure if this is my tri-type, but I may most naturally access the gut center is my 1, that's my home. Mm-hmm. And then I might most naturally access the 2 in the heart space, and I might most naturally access the 6 in the head space. And in that realm, I wouldn't quite be as balanced as if I push myself to access the 4 and access the 7. But it's still valuable information. Mm-hmm. If you know kind of, what do I resonate most with in each of those triads? Because there's goodness in every single number. Yeah. So there's no perfect way to handle this, though I would like that as the perfectionist. But knowing where you are might be a tri-type if you're familiar with that, knowing where you are, and then allowing yourself to move toward transformation by pulling on those harmony triads.
And the things like wings and the arrows and the tri-type theory, they're all super helpful information in that as you sit with your home type, you get to know more about yourself, more about who God created you to be, more about where your unique defense mechanisms popped up and emerged throughout your life, where your childhood, what do they call that? Childhood
wounds?
Childhood wound, we like to
dismissed childhood message.
Childhood message. No, yeah. I think there was another one that came up.
Childlike crisis. Childhood.
Yeah.
We're not going to figure this out while we're live.
That's my 1 wing right there coming out. To be, particular. Those are all super helpful because it does bring self-awareness of where you're at, and then also might reveal where are there gaps. Mm-hmm. Because like in Christina's example, do you want to talk about the postures?
I'm hot. Can you turn our air down in our home?
Look at that. Paying attention to your gut.
Okay. What did you ask me to talk about?
So you were talking about being imbalanced. If you had the 1, 2, 6, why would that be imbalanced?
So if I live where I naturally am, which is kind of high in my 1 and my 2 and my 6, I am accessing my head, heart, and my gut. But I actually show up as a compliant or duty-driven person in each of those spaces. So the 1 is the person who's compliant in my gut triad, and then the 2 is compliant in the heart, and then the 6 is compliant. So that just means in the world, I'm sort of only living in that type of stance,
Yeah.
rather than trying to access a more assertive stance from one of them and a more withdrawn stance from another. So let me explain how that would look. So in the harmony triad, if I'm compliant as a 1, as a 4, I can become more withdrawn and go introspective and pull away. And then if I access my 7, that's more of an assertive type. And so I have more balance between those 3 things. So you're not just trying to balance your instincts, but you're trying to also try to balance your stances,
Yes.
which I think is super interesting.
Yes. And they all match up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a withdrawn stance,
Mm-hmm.
an assertive stance,
Mm-hmm.
and a compliant or dutiful stance within each harmony triad,
Mm-hmm.
and within each instinctual center, which we were calling the head, heart, and gut triads. But maybe instinctual centers is the better word.
Sure. So if you guys
Clarity.
remember, when we're talking about like those of us who identify being in the gut center, we really value power and control. And then for those in the heart, we tend to really value and look for approval and affection. And for those in the head, you tend to look for security and survival. So as you start reaching for those harmony spots, if I pull for my 4, I pull for my 7, now I'm bringing some, I need to reach for security also. I don't need to just look for affection if I just do my 1 and my 2, if I just sit where I normally am, I'm really high in both those numbers. Anyway, so it's just an interesting thing to think about, trying to keep all the parts in balance. Hope that makes sense. It's hard to get into all the nuances. We're just talking generalities here. So
something that I find really encouraging when Claire was presenting this information to us is just that she was really saying all of those things are within you. They just might be a little undernourished, mm-hmm. or underrepresented or under-discovered. And so I just also would affirm each of you that you may feel stuck in a certain maybe you're very compliant, very duty driven. You're also an accountant. You're like, life is set up to be focused on the rules and pleasing others and staying within the lane. And that is awesome. That is a gift, but it also becomes a burden if that's the only flavor that you can operate in. And so that's where it might be more difficult. And so the harmony triads and seeking harmony really, I feel like it's built on the premise that there is God's image in each of us, and that we will reflect one aspect of God more higher, but that doesn't mean that we cannot draw from the fullness that abounds from God's Spirit within us, even to bring it to the spiritual realm and be able to have some of that.
Mm-hmm. So another plug for this delightful book. So as you're trying to think through, okay, I think I know my type, my home base, and I kind of want to learn more about these harmony triads, there is this beautiful chart, I love charts, beautiful chart in the back that kind of sets you up. So you just turn to a page and it says 8s, 2s, and 5s. And it shows you if you could develop those parts of yourself, what it would look like, the harmony you would see. And one of the things that we've done recently in a training we went through is learn to sort of practice that by creating a mantra.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of interesting. I don't know how many of you are familiar with mantras, or if that word elicits a weird visual in your head of some other religion. A mantra is basically just something you say to yourself in order to help you bring presence to the moment. And it's something simple that you can remember and helps you to be present. So do you want to talk about how to develop a mantra that would help you access that harmony space?
No, just
Super.
So part of what is useful about the book, let me point to that and it'll make more sense in a sec. So this is for 2s. There's a list of descriptive words. I am helpful. I am needed. I am indispensable, generous, supportive. These are all of the some of the beautiful aspects of the 2. And so if you sit in the 2-5-8 harmony triad, you could look at those descriptions in each of those 3 home bases. And it's going to be a lot easier for you to identify one from your home type because that's more native or natural for you. And it doesn't take as much energy. But to challenge yourself to try to look into the 5, look into the 8, and to read through those descriptors. And you could also just go to the Enneagram Institute and find some other descriptors of those numbers. You wouldn't have to buy a book. But if you can find a nice chart from a reliable source, that would be even better because it would carry some of that, some of the intangible nuance. Sometimes it gets a little guessy or I don't know, shallow. Some of the Enneagram resources out there, but basically the mantra for a 9, one of the examples is peace affects team, and so the peace taken from the 9. The affects, affects from the 3, and the 6, team. So very teamwork oriented. The 3 is very effective and productive. And so it's wrapping all of those qualities into one mantra that you might sit with, that you might repeat like a breath prayer throughout the day. You might even just breathe in and out and almost pray that over yourself. And kind of lean into that kind of a mantra.
So the one that Claire in one of her resources recommends for the 1 is goodness creates joy, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. So that's a 1. Goodness creates, which is a 4. Joy, which is a 7. I really resonate with that idea. It helps me. So when we were being trained, she was talking to us about what are the best times to pull out these mantras. And for me, it's when I find myself kind of unconsciously going to a reaction rather than being present to what I could be in the moment. So if I'm going to be, thrust into anger, which is a natural reaction, or maybe resentment as a 1, if I can stop and say, wait a second, yes, goodness matters to me, but it's not just goodness, it's goodness can create joy. And so how do I pull from those things? And then, you're invited to create your own and use maybe a different word from a 4, like maybe empathy or maybe discernment or something, something that resonates you from another number in your harmony triad, a word that sticks out to you, maybe something you want to cultivate, or maybe something.
Or just draws you. You're attracted to that.
You're just attracted to it for whatever reason. You might just sit with those things and just immediately realize, oh, that's the word I want to have spoken over myself. Yeah. Really pretty powerful. I would love to talk about this on Thursday if anybody has time between now and then to kind of think through this. And just see what maybe lands with you. If there's something that you could pull in, I'd love to hear some of your ideas.
And I think it's the invitation to do this it is both an affirmation and a challenge, because for me, peace affects team. Like those are flavors within myself that I can recognize, but they also challenge me to show up, to be my full self. And so that's the integration and the wholeness that we really seek.
Yeah.
Should I show them some of the other ones?
You want to just read through them?
Sure.
Okay.
So for the 2, and this is just one example, the 2 could be love contemplates, then decides. So the contemplative withdrawn side of the 5, then decides from the 8.
And the 3 might be effective loyalty harmonizes. So not just effective to get things done, but to be loyal and then to bring harmony with that. So you're going from your 3 to your 6 to your 9.
Yeah. And because the shadow side of the 3 can just get things done and kind of plow through, but it might not create harmony. And so by pulling on the harmony of the 9 and the loyalty of the 6, that's another shade within my same harmony triad. The 4, originality joyfully reforms. So you pull on so originality being the 4, joyfully from the 7, reforms from the 1, and that taking action there.
A lot of these have your home type as the first word, which might be helpful as you're starting off to kind of put the thing you resonate with most first, and then the other 2 things you're trying to access more often, secondary or tertiary. But you can also reverse it. There's no like right or wrong with it. It's mostly just what resonates with you, what sticks, what can you get to quickly, what can you breathe, what can you pray, that kind of thing. So something for the 5 might be wisdom, lovingly directs. So the 5, the 2 next, and then the 8. So
6, faithfulness produces peace. Faithfulness produces peace.
I like the 7. Joy is deeply stable. As I think about our daughter, who I think is a 7, it's like joy is one of her leading characteristics, but the idea of her having deep stability, it's like right on. Let's move towards some harmony. Let's get some balance. I mean, she's young. I can't expect that. I'm not even balanced, but I mean, that would just be such beauty, because I see so much good stuff come from her joy, but sometimes it's just all over the place, and she hasn't been able to wrangle it in yet, to find stability that I know she can bring.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of cool. So good. I wonder how some of our 7s would resonate with that one.
And then for the 8, one example is justice is contemplative love. Pulling from the 5 and then the 2.
Kind of soften some of those 8s. Maybe rough edges that can come off with an 8 who's such a strong presence in the world, fighting for justice, being a challenger, but to have some contemplative love in there really can balance it out. So anyway, just ideas as you're thinking through things and trying to find ways to be more harmonized.
When I was experimenting with my mantra, I decided to emphasize the 3, because though in my profession I lean into my 3 space, it's actually the least accessible for me. And so I like that I'm challenged in my daily work to lean into that 3 space. It automatically brings some balance, but I still feel like there's some room for growth right there.
Yeah. Okay, so we want to end with giving a couple of ideas about some spiritual practices you can incorporate into your life as you're wrapping up the series and you're thinking about, how do I keep this going, or go a little deeper. So Dustin's going to kind of talk through a couple ideas for that.
So the head, heart, gut mantra that we just talked through is fully a spiritual practice in and of itself, especially if you incorporate it in a way that is reflective or mindful, meditative, prayerful. If you're intentional about stepping back and saying, here's this thing, God, show me a little bit more about who I am, and where you might be inviting me to grow. There's a practice right there. So that's super worthwhile if you want to try that out and let us know how it goes. Another one that I wanted to bring up in this in the Enneagram context is the nightly examine, which normally the examine is it's a practice, a Ignatian practice it's been around for 500 years and people have tweaked it. It's a very simple prayer practice that Jesuits would encourage people to practice every night. And as you go to bed, you just become aware that God's Spirit is with you in that moment and has been with you the whole day. And then you start with some gratitude and you just name, like, here's something I'm thankful for, God. And then the third movement is to play through the last 24 hours, your day, and to just simply notice, like, who was I with? Where did I go? What did I do? What sticks out to me? And in a non-judgmental way, you're just observing, you're kind of playing back the movie reel, so to speak. And then the fourth, within that, you're noticing particularly where was there strong emotion? What emotion arises within you as you recall, and what also seemed to pop up throughout the day. And then the fourth movement is to kind of sit with that and kind of hold that before God and pray about that. What does that say? And kind of just hold that before God. And then the fifth movement is usually just looking toward tomorrow. What does tomorrow hold? And what might you feel the Spirit calling you to take forward from this, from the examine. And so through the lens of the Enneagram, I think that we can even broaden some of this and to ask ourselves specifically what, like in the second step of where you're expressing gratitude, like what am I grateful for about my Enneagram type? And where do I see a gift from myself that emerged throughout the day? Where was I a gift to others? Where were others a gift for me that may have stemmed from their Enneagram type? And then as you go throughout your day, that you could then kind of gently ask yourself, where did you ignore your heart? Where did you live out of your heart? Where were you paying attention to your body and fulfilling your body's needs? Where did you neglect your body? Where did you really utilize and dive deep into your head and that intellect and logic? And then where may have you been not feeling a lack of connection, or maybe a sense of draining there? And so you could just kind of splice the Enneagram into this. And so in this book, there's an example. They walk you through it to do that. But I've always loved, not always, for several years now, I've loved the examine because not only is there an endless amount of things to pray about, because we have days and we do things in the day, and there's variety there to draw from. And so I never feel like I run out of words to say or, thoughts to think about that. So there's some short-term fruit immediately, and even just taking, like people say, 10 to 15 minutes. You can do it in 5 even, especially after you get used to the rhythms. But just taking 10 minutes to think about your day is so powerful. For me, when I do an examine at night, I'm actually able to better fall asleep, because then it's almost like the loose ends of the day I've been able to put to rest and sit before God with those things that may have caused me stress. And so anyway, it's always been good. But in terms of seeking harmony and balance, I think there's a lot of fruit. And so the long-term benefit of doing the examine for, let's say you try it out 10 times. If 8 of those times the same kind of situation came up, the same kind of stress came up, the same kind of relationship, or the same, drain in your day, it's easier for us to notice the negative emotions, but it's valuable to notice both the positive and negative emotions. But if the same thing is popping up, that is probably incredibly revealing about not only what maybe externally is causing a lot of stress, but what reactions are we having to that scenario that maybe we could tweak our perspective on, or leverage another lens of the Enneagram to reframe and be able to have a different reaction, to choose something else, to have more freedom. And so in terms of earlier when we talked about levels of health, bringing more awareness through the nightly examine would be huge growth step.
I love that. So then do you suggest with the examine, if it's supposed to be non-judgmental as you're practicing it, do you suggest that people, if they start noticing patterns, they take time to kind of strategize or dig deeper into those outside of the examine practice? Or is it something you should do within that 10-minute period?
I would say both.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say if there's something that continues to pop up, just by paying attention to it and holding that in prayer before God, that is going to lessen its power over you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Secondly, I've heard some people say if something feels like a huge burden or a mountain, I guess, in your life, maybe that's something you take to a spiritual friend or a spiritual director, and you just talk about it with them and get their perspective, because maybe they would be, obviously they offer an objective perspective that's still supportive, but it could be that you're in the 147 triad and you're just really having a hard time seeing this thing from another angle, even when you're trying to pull all that together. But if they're from 2, 5, and 8 or 3, 6, 9, they might have a completely different perspective and ask a question that might open up a new territory for you. So
that's great.
So another thing that you want me
Go
to talk
for
about
it.
another
You're
practice?
doing great. Yeah.
So another practice that really the Enneagram has helped bring clarity for me is through our retreat journeys. If you feel yourself coming alive through these conversations and you have thought about or you've never heard about our formation communities, we start them in January. They've been virtual this last quarter, but it is an incredible journey of experimenting with different spiritual practices and taking time away outside of your normal life to take 24-hour retreats. And so the very first retreat that we do is themed around silence and solitude, because each of us, we have a very fast-paced world. There's so many things that demand our attention. There's so many things stimulating that are, grabbing our attention and stimulating our everyday, whether that's social media, whether that's work, whether that's phone calls, whether it's things to do around the house, or it's people to take care of, or kids to parent, or school classes, to tend to, whatever. Taking some time away and for silence and solitude is super healing and useful.
So I'm going to pause for a second.
Yes.
Do you mind? I don't know. I just want to make sure we get to comments while people are still watching. So Holly, thank you for commenting. I saw that you said you love the mantra idea and the examine. And then how do you suggest dealing with wrestling with the shadow side of your number? So I think I have a better answer to this than I maybe did on week 1, I hope. One of the things I think that is important is to remind ourselves that focusing on our shadow side does not necessarily improve it. But that what helps us become more healthy individuals is through accessing those other points in the Enneagram. So for instance, as a 1, I can be very, very hyper-focused on making things better and improving environments, improving systems. And if that's all I'm thinking about is just the need to improve, then I'm going to notice the flaws. I'm going to notice those things. I'm not going to be able to trick myself into not noticing those. But if I access my 4 and if I start utilizing some of my noticing to notice beauty and notice creation and notice the ways God is speaking to me in the moment, in the more of the ability to withdraw and be present that a healthy 4 is. Or if I can utilize my 7 space and build in time for true rest and true relaxation or activities that bring joy, I think naturally I will start becoming more balanced rather than fighting the shadow side. I think in myself, I still want to fight it. And, that's, I don't know if that's good or bad or whatever, but I think I'll be more successful if I just start reaching for those other points instead of spending too much time contemplating all the ways I don't measure up in my own type. So I think that plays out for all of them. I know as a 1 that makes sense to me. Yeah. I think it probably does for most.
Well, and honestly, it's interesting with the 1 because noticing is a major strength of yours, but you notice the flaws within exterior things or interior. That's where your criticisms, the ones can be very self-critical. So that strength is not balanced by something else. Right. It's overexpressed. But for other numbers besides the 1, that noticing would be just noticing your shadow side is helpful, but then to be leaning into other spaces. But for you, you notice it all day,
all the
every
live
day.
long day.
All the live long day.
Yeah. I hope that's helpful. I'm happy to talk about it more. But I think it probably plays out for all the other numbers. As a 9, Dustin just thinking, this is a caricature of a 9, but Dustin just thinking, I shouldn't just lay here taking naps. I should probably do something. Well, that's not going to change anything. He has to actually decide, what can I put my hand to be effective in the world? And he has to, start being effective and reaching for the good things in himself that are actually effective, not just fighting it and saying, I don't want to do this. So I think it plays out for everybody.
Yeah.
He does not just lay around and take naps, though. That's why I poked at it, because it's not actually a pain point.
Well, and going back to the examine, one of the movements is to notice, but then movement 5 is looking toward tomorrow with some commitment. And so there is both of those.
I love that.
Both of those interspliced.
Yeah, that works for me. I probably have a hard time with this sitting in it, and I just want to move toward tomorrow with commitment. I need to do a little more of the sitting with it. And anyway, I cut you off from silence and solitude, and I really want to make sure we get to that. I think it's really interesting how the Enneagram lines up with these practices. So
we always called it silence and solitude, the first retreat, because that is an invitation that all of us need. Right. I found it very easy to do that. Maybe because I'm a withdrawn type. That was initially I thought, I'm a new parent. When I was going through the journey, I just need some space to decompress and just get to let the fog clear. And that's totally true. But then as I journeyed with other groups, I realized that the invitation for me that I found through the Sacred Enneagram was that there's one other component. It's silence, solitude, and then stillness. And so my invitation as a member of the gut center of intelligence is actually stillness, to slow down, because being in the gut triad, we're drawn to be active,
right,
to do things.
Right.
And that's where we find our value. That's where we find our strength. And so it's hard to turn that off. Whereas for the heart people, solitude is a challenge for them. And so the invitation on a retreat is to not be tending to other people's needs, not to be impressing anyone else's things, not to be creating a party or some kind of social type of a experience. Yeah. And so on a retreat, you feel purposeless, you feel useless because you're alone. What do? Loneliness is scary. Whereas for me, it's oddly not. I cannot remember a time where I felt like I had had too much solitude. I don't. Nothing to be said for,
I'm not offended.
This one here, but my quota for solitude is, I don't know. It's just never been reached. So then for the head center of intelligence, the main invitation on a retreat is for silence. It is for the silence not only of words where they're not problem solving and they're not getting data and they're not being enthuusalistic about something. They're not promoting like a 7 salesperson. So where those words normally serve them incredibly, and their thinking and their rationality serves them well, on a retreat, you can shut that down.
Is it almost like a silencing of thoughts?
It's a silencing of the internal as well as the external.
Right, because there's no speaking, but you could still be very, very busy in your head if you live in that head space.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
Especially for for output there. And so I've started saying, when we get to the second retreat, which focuses on the Enneagram, that it's silence, solitude, and stillness. And so I just encourage you, especially in times like this that are very trying and stressful still, to carve out some moments of retreat. Find a retreat in your everyday life, even if it's an hour, even if it's 25 minutes in the middle of the day, whether that's going on a walk or whether that's getting an Airbnb from somewhere else and spending the night, or whether that's closing your computer, shutting down your phone, detaching from all screens, however you need to do the retreat, be mindful within your Enneagram type, what is the unique invitation of that slowing down?
Mm-hmm.
Which part is slowing down? And I think we need all of those things.
Definitely, we all need all of them. I very much resonate with the idea of needing stillness, though. I remember my experience, beginning of the formation community. We were the beta group. We were the guinea pigs for it all. And I remember thinking to myself, but what do I do I get it. I'll stay quiet. I'll follow those rules.
Mm-hmm.
I won't go near anyone. I'll be alone. But what am I supposed to be doing?
In your room.
In my room. Like, what do I do? How do I feel? Like, I needed a plan. I needed something to put my hand to. And truthfully, I did end up writing. I'm not sure if that was like 100% stillness, but it's more stillness than I normally have. That's how I spent
some of the floor space.
Yeah, maybe. So that's how I spent a lot of my time, because I fight that within myself, the constant need to be moving. I'm even moving right now. So anyway, I'd love to talk about that on Thursday night. I hope so many of you can join us as we wrap up.
Sure.
Sorry.
Conclude? So
yeah.
I could sense she was going that direction. So within, to add another layer. So the withdrawn types, they may need to actually show up in those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another layer there. Whereas for me,
so with the withdrawn types, just a little reminder, it's our 9s, our 4s, and our 5s.
Yes. So this is less, I can't say for certain exactly how it all works together, but as a withdrawn gut type, I can check out in not do anything. So the invitation is to actually engage that stillness, to actually be cognizant of it.
Yes.
And so a practice that I've leaned into recently actually forces me to be present to my stillness. And so I can go into more detail if you want to chat more about specific practices that would fit you. I'd love to explore and maybe find one there.
That's great. Yeah. Okay, so Thursday night, it's our last session. We'll have a Zoom link. We'll share it in the We Are Imago Day group on Facebook. You guys can jump in. We really want to start with a practice all together. So if that gives you the heebie-jeebies, feel free to jump on like 10 minutes late. But we want to open with some kind of practice we can all do together. You can turn off your cameras and just listen to Dustin's soothing voice walk you through it. It'll be a good time to reflect. And then we'll talk a little bit more, answer your questions specifically about the Harmony Triad model, about any questions you might have about those instinctual types we were talking about with the self-preservation, sexual and social varieties of variance.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about triad types a little bit if you're confused about that.
Levels of
health. Yeah, any of it. So if anybody,
it's all fair game.
Yeah, I hope that you guys have enjoyed our teaching. Please feel free to go back and check out those other numbers that could bring you some more harmony. Everybody who's shared throughout this series has had such wisdom to bring. So there's no one you could go wrong listening to. I feel like everybody's decently healthy, so that's nice too. All right.
I'm glad that my favorite part of this series is listening to other people talk about their time.
Oh yeah, so fascinating.
Yeah,
so fascinating.
A lot of good quality people we got. All right. Well, until next time. Thanks, Church fam.
All right. Take care.
Bye.